Hello. Welcome for today M2M Live. And we have today with us, is as we all know, is the second Sunday of the month. And usually we have our brother Olan with us. And welcome, Olan. How are you,
Hello,
brother?
doing very well. Hope you are.
Praise the Lord. I see you have a contradict sticker in the back there. Huh?
Yeah,
It's awesome.
one
Uh,
of these days I'm gonna put it on my car.
Yeah, it's the opposite of coexist. Because how can Islam and Christianity coexist? Muslims and Christians, we can coexist. We can share the gospel with them. We can live, even if they persecute us. Maybe we can coexist, but I don't know if Islam want us to coexist with them. But I'm talking about the religion wise. It cannot be both true, Christianity and Islam. Um, Now, what is your topic today in Genesis, right?
Yes, I want to look at the first few chapters of Genesis and focus specifically on Genesis 3:15, the proto-Evangelium, or the first gospel.
And my understanding, you're gonna expand it for the next few months. You're gonna focus on the book of Genesis.
That's right. I eventually want to maybe finish up with Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah, and I think this is one of the you find this story in the Quran as well, and I think that's as close as the Quran gets to the biblical gospel with that story there.
Awesome, brother. It's all yours, and I will come back
Okay.
again during the Q&A. Please, you guys watching, um, you can post your questions on the YouTube chat, and please start the question with the word question or Q in order for us to find your question easy. Thank you so much for joining us today, and brother, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, George. All right. Well, the question that some are asking is Genesis 3:15 about how humans hate snakes, or does it give us God's solution to the problem of evil? And as usual, I think the answer to these questions can be found by looking at the broader context. The saying, context is king, is true. And if we look at the first several chapters, specifically the first two chapters, 10 times we find the word good. Adam and Eve experienced this goodness, but as you know, they rebelled against God and ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And, and after this, almost immediately, God reveals the promise of a redeemer who would crush the head of the serpent. The serpent would strike his heel, but he would crush the head of this serpent. Again, Genesis 3:15 is called the proto-Evangelium, or the first gospel. And I think Genesis 1 through 11 are just so foundational to our understanding of Abraham, the nation of Israel, and how God would bless all of the nations through the seed of Abram. And if we reduce the account of Adam and Eve down to just a few simple words, basically, summarizing the story, we have the blessing, the seed, and the land. I'm going to, focus on these three for quite some time tonight. But we can find these same three things throughout the rest of the Bible. As I studied this, I couldn't help but think how there is just such consistency in the Word of God, because really God doesn't change, and He's revealed His Word to us. He's communicating to us, but you don't have these things in the Quran. And I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but you would expect a good God to clearly communicate, to have a what I want to call a meta narrative. All of these things that we find in the Bible, this overarching theme from Genesis to Revelation, The blessing, the seed, and the land. We find these all throughout the Bible. And again, I think we do because Yahweh is a loving or good God. He's also just. I don't want to overemphasize the fact that he's loving, but these two are not in conflict with each other. A perfectly good and righteous God, we would expect him to deal with evil and unrighteousness. I mean, God's going to quarantine evil someday. That's what we call hell. So if we look at the Bible, we find the story of good news, again, from Genesis to Revelation. And the cross of Jesus Christ, here God satisfies both the love and the justice. He satisfies his love and his justice. Genesis 1 through 11 serve as the background to understanding, I think, these two attributes of God. And while Genesis 3:15 is known as the first gospel, I think we find a subtle hint of the good news also in Genesis 1:28. Here it says that God blessed them, that is Adam and Eve, and God said to them, be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth. We could summarize this verse with our three simple words. It begins with the blessing, again, which flows out of the goodness of God. We find the seed, be fruitful, multiply, and then there's also the topic of the land, fill the earth. I think 128 anticipates and again sets the stage for Genesis 3:15, and obviously the rest of the Bible as well. So God blesses Adam and Eve just as he desires to bless the nations. He told them to be fruitful and multiply, and therefore the seed of Abraham is a continuing theme. We see this later on. And we see God commands the first couple to subdue the earth. In the context of Abraham, this same word that's translated as earth here, it is land in the context of Genesis chapter 12. Verse 1, God told Abraham to leave his country or his land, same word. In Genesis 12:7, God promised to give the descendants of Abraham the earth or the land of Israel. And then in Joshua 18:1, the sons of Israel, they assemble at Shiloh and they set up the tent meeting there, and the land or the earth was subdued before them, is what the Bible tells us. All of this points to Christ, the church, and the New Jerusalem that we find in Revelation. But again, tonight I want to focus on the first few chapters of Genesis, and Lord willing, we will eventually get to Genesis 22 with Abraham and Isaac on Mount Moriah. But I just wanted you to see how important Genesis is, and again how it serves as the foundation for our understanding the overarching message of the Torah and the Bible in general. There's continuity between Genesis and Revelation. I mean, if you've ever read the Quran, you can appreciate that. So I want us to take a closer look at the creation account. We might be tempted tonight to just blaze right through Genesis 1 and 2, but I want to highlight some of the details. In chapter 1, verse 1, we're told that God created, bara. This word speaks of function or really purpose. And the God of the Bible doesn't use the more common Hebrew word for creating, because he's not simply making the heavens and the earth, but everything is designed to achieve a specific end or a specific goal. And we know that the psalmist tells us that the heavens declare the glory of God. The New Testament tells us to do all for the glory of God. Creation is designed for this purpose or this end, what we might call teleology. And as far as the gospel is concerned, the Bible begins with what is good. I mean, you can't read through Genesis 1 and 2 without this drumbeat of what is good. And it's this unfolding picture throughout the rest of the Bible of the good news of Jesus Christ, which leads to an eternally good end. Um, Again, I want to contrast this with the Quran, which is, obviously to us as Christians, we know it's a satanic counterfeit. But no, I want you to notice how it makes many of the same claims that the Bible does, but it doesn't really communicate very well. Surah 17:9, it claims to be a guide that leads to a good end, or it says a great reward. But the Quran also reveals that Allah is not essentially good. He doesn't have a good nature. What he does doesn't flow out of goodness. He loves and he loves not. At times he may reveal something that is good, but only to replace it with what is evil. The Quran also doesn't act very well, as I've already said. It doesn't serve as a guide with random and contradictory chapters arranged from the longest to the shortest. I mean, I heard somebody say it's like reading the phone book, and I've repeated that several times. But again, if we go back to the nature of Allah, he can act in a way that is good, but he can also act in a way that is evil. And I love how one of my professors described the nature of Allah. He says, salt water does not flow from a freshwater stream. And if we look at Surah 478, it says that if any good reaches them, they say this is from Allah. But if any evil befalls them, they say this happened because of you. But here, immediately following this, they're told to say, all things are from Allah. Surah 4:28 tells us that man was created weak. So there's no such thing as, we don't open up the Quran and read the creation account and find the words, it was good, it was good, it was very good. This is not Allah's creation. And we know that everything Islam focuses on plays into the weakness of the flesh, really. For example, the power of men over women, sexual desires, revenge. The list goes on and on. We're certainly seeing a lot of this played out on the news right now. But if we return to our three simple points from the Bible, the blessing, the seed, and the land, it shouldn't surprise us that the God of Islam opposes all three of these. Again, over and over again, the one true God repeatedly says, and it was good. In verse 131 of Genesis, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. This is exactly what we should expect from a triune God who is love. He doesn't just love, he is love. And it's interesting that way back in Genesis 1:27, this passage uses the word bara 3 times in describing how man's created in the image of God. Now, I'm certainly not trying to say that we can build an argument from the Trinity on this. Certainly not from this one verse. But again, this is exactly what we would expect from a triune God. Man is created in his image, which Islam also rejects. And according to the Christian scriptures, man is unique. He's set apart from the rest of creation. We are, in some sense, prepared for the gospel. This anticipates the coming Redeemer, and eventually, the New Testament talks about the perfect man in Ephesians chapter 4, and then this, later on Paul talks about the second Adam, which is Jesus Christ. So there are shared, or what we might call communicable, attributes that man has as being made in the image of God. We are rational, we are moral creatures, and of course, how we relate to God and each other has consequences. Now, I think it's, as I say that, I want to point out that it should be obvious that we don't apply these attributes and a lot of these terms like righteousness or love or God's goodness. We don't apply these to us in the exact same way that we would apply them to God. We may have knowledge about a particular subject, but only God is omniscient. So knowledge is not applied to us in the same way that it is to God. I think that should go without saying, but I wanted to clarify that. But as human beings, we do appreciate what is good and what is righteous, even though we view these things through an imperfect, sinful lens. We desire them, I think, because of who God is. And meanwhile, Islam masquerades as a path towards a good end by appealing to man's desire for good things, for things that God created to be good. Islam abuses them. In other words, there's a lot of truth in the message of the Quran. There's a lot of similarities between Islam and Christianity, and sometimes I think I say the same thing over and over again. But I want to say this once more because I think it just resonates with me. But the most powerful lie is the one that gets as close as possible to the truth while remaining a lie. And this is exactly what we find in Islam. I think Islam tries to get as close as possible to the biblical gospel while simultaneously rejecting it. And so those who solely focus on the similarities between Christianity and Islam are just doomed to fail from the beginning. Even the devil himself recognizes both good and evil. In Genesis 3:5, he told Adam and Eve that God knows in the day that you eat from it, that is from the tree, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And again, the rest of the Bible is a contrast between these two, good and evil. And of course, the New Testament clarifies and comes to an end with Christ overcoming evil for us. But let me just I've used the word evil here several times, and I think it's just so important that we define this term. So, what exactly is evil? Evil is not a created thing, but it's a corruption of what is good, really. So, regardless of what you might have heard, there's no such thing as pure evil. There's no evil floating around. There are only evil things. It's like a hole in a sock. The hole is real, There's an actual hole in the sock, but it's a corruption of a good sock. So I think it's very important that we understand that this is what evil is. The technical term would be a privation of a good thing. And so, as such, evil is parasitic, and it depends on what is good. It's often illustrated as rust in a car or rot in a tree. There's no such thing as a completely rotten tree. At that point, it would cease to be a tree. It would no longer be a tree. So evil depends on what is good. And therefore you can have good without evil, but not evil without some good thing. And this fits very well with the Genesis creation account. Creation flows out of a perfect and a good God, but then sin comes along and we have corruption enter into the world. 2 Peter 1:4, speaking of the promises of God, again, we see these themes over and over again. So speaking about the promises of God, it says, so that through them you may participate in the divine nature. I could just stop right here and just the thoughts of this one verse. Because of what Christ has done, you and I get to participate in the divine nature. And because of that, the verse goes on to say that we have escaped the corruption in this world caused by evil desires. Romans 8:21 says that creation will eventually be set free from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. What happened in Genesis 3 was catastrophic. It was a catastrophic event that changed the course of creation. And of course, our Muslim friends want to, soften this idea of sin, and they may talk about sin, but they're not using this word in the same way that we are. They have a very low view of sin. In the Bible, this is an event that changes, not only the course of creation, but it changes the nature of humanity. And then God promises a redeemer immediately, almost immediately after the first couple sin. We find the promise of a redeemer. In Genesis 4, we see that evil enters into creation here, and really the rest of the Bible is again a contrast between good and evil. Genesis 4, Cain murders Abel. In Genesis 9, we have a similar contrast between good and evil. Genesis 12, we also have the contrast between good and evil with the promise of a blessing through Abraham. And then in Genesis 22, we have a picture of Christ and the promise to bless the nations through the seed of Abraham. This is Genesis 22:18. All of this begins with 3:15. Now, I want you to notice some specific parallels. I've already talked about the blessing, the seed, and the land, but now I want to expand on these ideas. In the first 3 chapters of Genesis, we have basically 7 themes. Number 1, there's God's instruction. There's also, the consequences of disobedience, but God's instruction. Then, secondly, in 3:16, we have God's warning. 3:6, we have man's disobedience. Chapter 3, verses 8 through 13, God interrogates them. Chapter 3, verse 14, God then curses them. Chapter 3, 23 and 24, they are banished from Eden. And then finally, the seed is promised in Genesis 3:15 as the solution. Now, these 7 themes, and really much of what I've given you, can be found in the in Moody's Handbook of Messianic Prophecy. I would highly recommend this book. And if you look at Genesis 3 here, when it deals with this, it goes on to show you how all 7 of these themes can be found in the first 3 chapters, or I'm sorry, the first few chapters of Genesis. Again, the story of Cain and Abel, you find these exact 7 things. Story of Noah from Genesis chapter 9, we find these same 7 themes. And they all end with the seed. So there's a theme that's continuing. And again, even to this day, we know that there is this ongoing conflict between good and evil. And if we turn to the New Testament, Galatians 3:29 tells us if you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's seed. You are Abraham's descendants, heirs according to the promise. When I talk about this passage, or I preach on this passage in a Baptist church, and people respond in silence, I repeat it. I mean, this is the amen moment right here. I mean, this is the gospel. If you belong to Christ, then you are Abraham's descendants, heirs. You will inherit the promises of God. And I rejoice in the fact that eventually someday God will quarantine evil. The serpent of old will be cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where Revelation tells us that the beast and the false prophet are also there, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. I am, I'm always a little bit worried that I might not have enough to say, or that I have too much, but I think I'm going to stop right there. It's about at the 30-minute mark, and Lord willing, we will pick back up here next time. And I want to point out again some of these these 7 themes that I've mentioned, and how they are, again, brought out in the story of Cain and Abel, and we also see them in the story of Noah, and perhaps the next time we will deal with Abraham and Isaac. And so I'm going to stop right there.